Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking what has to be one of the most incredible, almost unbelievable stories in European football history. We're going back in time to an era when the beautiful game was basically locked in a massive ideological war. A literal battle between cynical, suffocating defense on one side and fearless, joyful, attacking flair on the other. And at the absolute center of this clash? Well, it's a story that sounds like it was written for a Hollywood movie.
So, let's dive right into this mystery. I want you to just picture the modern football landscape for a second. Today, top-tier teams are these massive, cosmopolitan super squads, right? They're built with superstars signed for astronomical fees from every corner of the globe. Now strip all of that away, completely. How did a purely local group of Scottish lads, almost all of whom grew up within a literal stone's throw of their home stadium, manage to totally topple the most heavily favored, sophisticated European giants of their time? Well, to understand the sheer magnitude of what they achieved, we first need to look at exactly what they were up against.
Which brings us to Section 1, the Catenaccio era.
Now, if you know your football history, you've definitely heard of Catenaccio. It literally translates to doorbolt, and man did it live up to that name. Developed and really perfected by Inter Milan's manager, Helenio Herrera, this was a brutally effective, ultra-defensive system. It relied heavily on a libero, which is a sweeper sitting deep behind the main defensive line, paired with super rigid physical man-marking across the pitch. The entire philosophy was to frustrate you, break your spirit, and then snatch the win with a swift, ruthless counterattack. It wasn't exactly pretty to watch, but my goodness, it worked.
And the undisputed masters of this system, a team known simply as La Grande Inter. Their resume heading into 1967 was just staggering. They were the absolute powerhouses of the era, defending Italian champions, and they'd already won the European Cup in '64 and '65. Heading into this final, they were massive, heavy favorites aiming for their third European title. I mean, they had just eliminated the legendary six-time winners Real Madrid in the quarterfinals. Inter's defense was basically a fortress that nobody in Europe could seem to crack.
All right, so that's the giant. Now let's look at Section 2. Enter the Lisbon Lions.
On the completely opposite end of the spectrum, you had Celtic, managed by the absolute visionary Jock Stein. Celtic were doing things totally differently. Stein had drilled into them a philosophy of fluid, aggressive, high-tempo attacking football. But honestly, the most mind-blowing fact about this team is who they actually were. Remember, international transfers were already shaping top clubs back then. But this Celtic team? 100% homegrown. Every single one of their 11 starters and their subs was born within 30 miles of Celtic Park in Glasgow. Most of them grew up within 10 miles. This was literally a neighborhood squad taking on the absolute titans of European football.
So, we have the ultimate clash of styles brewing here. On one side, you've got Inter Milan setting up in their rigid 5-3-2 Catenaccio, pure calculated defensive pragmatism, just waiting to strike on the break. On the other side, Celtic's fearless 4-2-4 formation. They brought width, overlapping fullbacks, relentless attacking creativity, and absolutely zero interest in sitting back to defend. It's the classic, irresistible force meeting the immovable object.
And Celtic didn't just stumble their way into this final by getting lucky. They dominated the French champions Nantes. They showed incredible grit to overturn a first-leg deficit against a really tough Vojvodina side, saving themselves with a 90th minute header by their captain Billy McNeil. And then they outlasted Duke Leprade in the semis. Their high-pressing, relentless style had earned them their spot in Portugal.
Which brings us to the main event, Section 3, the 1967 Showdown.
Let's set the scene here. It's a hot, sunny May 25th, 1967, at the Estadio Nacional in Lisbon. The whistle blows, and almost immediately, it's an absolute disaster for the Scots. Barely 7 minutes in, Celtic gives away a penalty. Sandro Mazzola steps up for Inter, coolly converts it, and boom, 1-0 to Inter Milan. For the 45,000 fans in the stadium and the millions watching on TV, the script was playing out perfectly. Inter got their early goal, and then they did exactly what they always do. They locked the door, they dropped right back into their famous 11-man defensive shell, and pretty much everyone assumed another classic, suffocating Catenaccio win was totally inevitable.
But I want you to remember one single, absolutely staggering number right now. 42. Because this number defines exactly how Celtic reacted to going down 1-0. 42 is the total number of shots Celtic took during this match.
I mean, just let that sink in. The stats here are almost comical when you contrast them. Celtic had 42 attempts on goal. Inter, just 5. Celtic forced 10 corners. Inter forced 0. Celtic kept 64% of the possession. They completely refused to accept the Catenaccio chokehold. They pushed their fullbacks, Tommy Gemmell and Jim Craig, incredibly high up the pitch, just bombarding the Italian penalty box wave after relentless wave. And eventually, all that pressure had to count for something. It took over an hour, but in the 63rd minute, that overlapping fullback, Tommy Gemmell, stepped up and unleashed an absolute rocket of a 25-yard strike that flew straight into the top corner. 1-1. Did Celtic sit back and protect the draw? No way. They just kept coming. Finally, with barely 6 minutes left on the clock, Stevie Chalmers taps in the winner. 2-1 Celtic. The great immovable object was officially broken.
When that final whistle blew, pure, unadulterated chaos erupted. Euphoric Celtic fans completely flooded the pitch. It was actually so intense that the officials couldn't even do a normal trophy presentation on the field. Captain Billy McNeil had to be escorted by armed police around the outside of the stadium just so he could lift a trophy all by himself up in the stands. Meanwhile, a visibly furious Helenio Herrera literally locked his subdued Inter team inside their dressing room. And back in Scotland, 250,000 people packed the streets of Glasgow to welcome home the Lisbon Lions, the first ever British team and the first Northern European team to conquer the European Cup.
And the impact of this game changed everything. Section 4. A Tactical Revolution.
Jock Stein summed up this legendary achievement perfectly. He said, "We did it by playing football. Pure, beautiful, inventive football." You see, this wasn't just about bringing a piece of silverware back to Scotland. This was a massive ideological victory. Stein proved to the entire continent that you didn't have to rely on cynical, negative tactics to win on the biggest stage. You could win with joy, you could win with width, and you could win by attacking.
And the shockwaves of what Celtic did in Lisbon were felt far, far beyond the borders of Glasgow. Right around this time, a young Dutch player was watching European football incredibly closely, taking huge inspiration from the passion and attacking flair of British teams like Celtic. That kid was Johan Cruyff. He would, of course, go on to become one of the most brilliant footballing minds in history. Cruyff took this attacking inspiration and used it to help birth the legendary Total Football era with Ajax and the Dutch national team. It was a philosophy built entirely on the kind of attacking fluidity and positional freedom that Celtic championed back in '67.
And history has a pretty funny way of repeating itself, doesn't it? Just 5 years later, in 1972, Inter Milan dragged themselves back to the European Cup final, still stubbornly relying on their defensive Catenaccio. But this time around, they ran into Johan Cruyff's Ajax. While Celtic had cracked the Catenaccio code in '67, Ajax officially buried it in '72. That 2-0 victory marked a permanent, undeniable shift in European football tactics.
That 1972 Ajax squad essentially laid down the blueprint for modern football. They deployed this incredibly fluid 4-3-3 formation, which was really an early prototype of the intense press and possess game you see top clubs running today. Their players had crazy positional flexibility, defenders pushing up to attack, attackers dropping back to defend. Cruyff scored both goals that day, and Inter was completely smothered, creating almost zero offensive threat. Ajax proved once and for all that the tactical attacking revolution, sparked by Jock Stein's Celtic, wasn't some lucky fluke. It was the future of the sport.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this one thought. The next time you sit down to watch a modern, high-pressing, beautifully fluid football match, whether you're tuning into the Champions League or a World Cup final, ask yourself, how much of this beautiful game do we actually owe to a visionary manager and 11 completely local lads from Glasgow who simply refused to take a step back? The legacy of the Lisbon Lions isn't just sitting in a trophy cabinet, it is fundamentally woven into the DNA of the modern sport. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking the big questions.